in Jesus.
Amen.
When we were all kids in the church Christmas pageant, most of the boys wanted to be wise men. It was way cooler than being a sheep or an angel. Well, mostly the girls got to be angels for obvious reasons. But it was even better than being Joseph. The wise men got to wear all the fanciest bathrobes. And they got to wear crowns and fake beards. And they got to carry colorful and intricate cookie tins while everybody sang We Three Kings. But what is this story about the wise men really about? The simplest way to explain this story is that it shows what happens and how we respond when God comes among us. It shows what happens and how we respond when God comes among us. Every detail of the story shows what happens when God takes flesh and comes among us full of grace and truth. So let's walk through it. For starters, what about that star? There's been a lot of speculation about that star, you know. Was it Halley's Comet? Probably not. A few years too late. Well, was it the convergence of two planets that produced a startlingly bright light in the sky? I don't know, maybe. But this story is not a problem of astrophysics. It's a story about what happens when God comes among his people. See, back then, the stars, and believe me, without all the lights, they could see the stars very clearly. The stars stood for everything that was stable and orderly in the universe. We may be tearing the place up down here, but the stars are serenely going along their accustomed tracks like an orderly dance in the heavens. But then in the middle of all this calm order, something extraordinary swims into view. That star was a sign that something utterly unique and outstanding was occurring on earth. And so it was. The God who had created all things and who had set the stars in their courses was coming in person to visit his people. And that was a glory worth chasing down, even from the ends of the earth, just as the wise men did. Well, then what about all these prophecies? They're God's promises. That's all that a certain form of prophecy is. It's God's promise. And God is always making promises to us. He does so to raise our hopes and to prove that he can be trusted to do what he says. Now, the important thing about these promises is that God just doesn't fling them out in general, nor does God necessarily keep his promises the way we expect him to. All of his promises find their focal point in Jesus. All of God's promises lead to Jesus. He is the one in whom and through whom God keeps all of his promises. As St. Paul says in Corinthians, for all the promises of God find their yes in him. So here, the scribes and priests go and tell Herod, well, where's the Messiah going to be born? Well, from Bethlehem will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And indeed, it is so. God keeps his word. He is trustworthy. Although the promise is not necessarily kept the way we expect it to. It's kept when a child is born in a stable, not when a prince is born to a king in a palace. We learn to discern how it is that God keeps his promise. But actually, this story shows how God keeps another promise. Ages ago, he had promised that when he was among his people, all of the wealth of the nations would flow toward where he was, and the kings would bring it. And here it's beginning. Here it starts to happen. Gold and frankincense and myrrh are laid at his feet. Not that he needs any of it, of course, but it shows clearly that all wealth, all money, all goods, everything that can make a human being rich is to be laid at the feet of Jesus so that he may command how it will be used. It all belongs to him. Speaking about gold, frankincense, and myrrh, why those gifts in particular? Well, I talked about this with the kids recently, but it bears repeating. Gold is what you give to a king. It's the gift he likes best. It's tribute. This is a sign that when God comes among us, he does so as our absolute sovereign, our absolute authority. He alone has the right to command our full obedience on all things. Frankincense is a sweet-smelling substance that priests burn when they worship God. So Jesus comes to us as a strange kind of priest who is going to make an offering. He's going to offer his own body. He also comes to us as the God that we worship. And myrrh was what you used to embalm the dead. It was put on bodies. Thoughts of Jesus' death are never far from our thoughts, even in the happy seasons. He came to die. And finally, who are these wise men anyway? Tradition describes them as kings, but the actual word for them is magoi, magi, from which, yes, we get the word magic, but they're not magicians. These are learned men who understand the secrets of life. They know how the world works. They are indeed wise men. But they're also not Jews. Obviously, they're not even Christians because there weren't any Christians yet. They are, you could say, pagans. And isn't it a fascinating thought that in Matthew's gospel, the very first people to recognize Jesus for who he is and to worship him are neither Jews nor Christians, but foreigners and unbelievers. By contrast, his own people are troubled and upset about his birth. Herod is particularly upset. He thought he was supposed to be king, and the people worried that if Herod got upset, he might do something awful. Herod had a strong track record of cruelty, especially in his later years. We would call him a little paranoid. But this strange fact shows two things. First, when God comes among his people, we're not always very happy about it. He has a way of disrupting our normal patterns and expectations. People who enjoy power in particular feel instinctively that their normal perks and privileges will be canceled out, and they don't like that. God is not here to endorse whatever arrangements we may have made in his name. He is here to command us as he goes about his work. And, as these wise men show, it sometimes takes the outsiders who are first to appreciate what he's actually doing. Consider the Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. She was not a Christian, obviously, and I'm not even sure that she believed in God. But she absolutely adored Jesus because he made such a huge thing of forgiveness. Arendt saw clearly that without forgiveness, we would all be condemned and locked up in our mistakes, and the world would dissolve in cycles of punishment and vengeance. When God comes among us, all of human life is free to breathe again because God really and truly does forgive our very real wrongs and enables us to forgive each other. Or consider Mahatma Gandhi. He was a pious Hindu to the very end of his life. But he also admired Jesus for his nonviolence. He saw very clearly that Jesus cannot be used to justify violence, especially on the part of a ruling class out to maintain its status. Jesus stands with the small people, and his nonviolence is not passivity. It is actually a form of resistance to tyranny that is intended to set everybody free from the clutches of empire. Not just the people who are at the bottom, but the people who are at the top need to be freed from the clutches of empire so that they may live as human beings and not as oppressors and oppressed. For when God comes among us, he does so to set us free from the grip of the powers that are deforming our lives. Such people show that all human wisdom, whatever form it takes, even the wisdom that we may call secular, comes from God and should be drawn into his service. It's a beautiful story. We don't need to put on bathrobes to enjoy it. So let's just sing about the three kings now. Sing them into our hearts and our minds and our hopes and our faith.